coming up. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Barak Otieno. Let me just put on the video for those that may not know me. Yesterday, I made a presentation on the state of CCTLDs on the African continent. But today, I would like to make a presentation on community networks as an answer to the last mile. I will wear a different hat today as an building wireless community networks instructor for the Internet Society and also community networks practitioner. And I'm just going to share a real case study that I hope will be of benefit to the rest of the participants uh, on the call. Thank you very much, technical team. So loosely defined, community networks can be defined as um, telecommunication solutions for the community by the community. And the Internet Society, among many other actors, have been championing the community networks movement from 2016, first starting by building communities of practice within various countries. And currently acting as a catalyst for development of community networks in different countries. I'm going to present the case of Aherinet, a community network that is operating in the western part of Kenya, which largely developed during the COVID-19 period. And my thought is, or rather, what I will post in the room is to look at whether community networks are a viable alternative to the connectivity gaps that we are experiencing in our community. I appreciate the previous presentation that has been made, which has brought to the fore the issue of local participation. And not only local participation, but also meaningful participation. I also appreciate the various questions that have been raised about governance and leadership issues on the call. And I would wish to submit that leadership begins with people having the capacity among or within themselves to attract and appoint the right leaders for their environment or for their ecosystem. And I think for us as Africans, it's also important that we chart or we draw our narrative in terms of the type and the kind of leadership that we expect. Leadership develops over time, and I would wish to submit that there are many schools of thought when it comes to leadership on whether they are born or developed. And I think even as we talk about leadership, we must ask ourselves what efforts or initiatives are we putting in place to ensure that we develop the right leaders for the future. And I would like to start with the community networks conversation. Africa, as I submitted yesterday in my presentation, we are largely consumers of products on the internet value chain. But the call that many are making in the presentations that have been made yesterday and today is that we want to move away from the consumer narratives to actually charting our own narrative on what the internet is for us and what the internet can do for us. And with that, we have to begin at local level, thinking locally and acting globally, as is said in internet governance parlance. And I think community networks are a viable alternative to the African community taking control of the narrative. If we look at investors within the internet ecosystem or telecommunication ecosystem in Africa, less than 50% of most of the investments are actually indigenous investments. You find that a lot of the investments are from beyond the continent. And I think it really speaks to the narrative on how citizens then relate with internet products and internet services. And I think if we are to change this narrative, then it's important that we start at the local level, designing and deploying our own internet infrastructure so that at local community level, we are able to appreciate what is the internet insofar as our local communities are concerned. How do we design and develop this particular internet infrastructure, and how does the value chain look like from a local perspective, even as we think outwards globally. So at AHERINET, which is a community network that I help to design and conceptualize, we serve unserved and underserved communities around Lake Victoria, within the western part of Kenya. And of course, the challenge that came to the fore is that we realized that there was a huge gap because many service providers were looking at connectivity for lack of a better word, uh, from a commercial lens. And so whenever the communities could not, whenever they felt that local communities are not viable enough financially, then most of them moved out. And we took initiative alongside and as part and parcel of the some of the initiatives championed by the Internet Society to start a connectivity initiative using locally available resources and run by local institutions, as I am going to demonstrate. And some of the things that have come out, even as we deployed the community network, is the issue of affordable connectivity. Most of the community members have a challenge accessing the internet, not because they don't want, but because it is beyond what they can be able to afford, especially when you put into context the issues, their daily survival needs, for lack of a better word. The other issue that we observed is the issue of capacity building. And I'm glad we have been talking about the network operator groups because we have been able to also present about our community networks at the Kenya Network Operators Group and also get contributions from local service providers on how to be able to improve our community connectivity setups. And then, of course, there are issues of trust. The other observation we made is that when you are in a rural area, to be able to get support, for instance, looking at a rural hospital and the internet goes down, it takes 2 or 3 days for that facility to be able to get support, simply because it might be one customer that is 500 kilometers away. And in the scheme of things, or in the priority of a commercial operator, they would rather focus on the big fish, probably where the money is. And so you find that, for instance, a hospital is unable to admit patients or discharge patients because they are using an online hospital management system that most of the citizens are using, which is tied to the National Health Insurance Fund. So that is just a value proposition to show why the community networks are important. The other conversation that has come up as we have discussed community networks is whether it is taking the place of traditional ISPs or traditional operators. And from the AHERINET experience, I wish to submit that community networks depend on traditional ISPs to make sure that they extend connectivity to the last mile. Most of them are organizations similar to the NOGs that are addressing connectivity needs at the local community level. And so you find that it's actually addressing a larger market that has been overlooked. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right. Yeah, so for AHERINET, in the interest of time, I won't go into much detail about how the community network operates, but this is just a snapshot of the network diagram of the infrastructure that we have built within the community, which has addressed areas that were previously unserved and underserved. And we did this, of course, with the support of the Internet Society and other actors who wanted to make sure that during the COVID-19 pandemic period, the people who moved back to their rural homes, or the people who previously would access the internet from their offices and now are not able to access from their offices because of the instructions to work from home, were able to access connectivity and continue with their livelihoods. And we saw a lot of electronic commerce, or I would say the gig economy coming up within the communities where we built up the network infrastructure. We also saw a lot of the infrastructure being used for capacity building. That is the local schools, of course, resorting to Zoom, which I believe is the case in other areas around the continent. Next slide, please. All right. So just to give a sneak preview of the HeriNet Community Network, it's a collaborative effort or initiative between a number of organizations, chief among them Community Initiative Support Organization or Community Initiative Support Services, which has worked in communities in Western Kenya for the last 30 years. Africa Higher Education Research Institute, supported, of course, by the Internet Society and other actors. So the reason why I'm bringing up the ecosystem is that the non-governmental organization focusing on the community initiative support services, acted as the entry point into the community. Because of their understanding of the community, they were able to reach out to the community and sort of advocate for the benefits of the internet and encourage the community to embrace the internet at local level. On the other hand, a lot of the youth who are participating in various activities of the organization were also tapped as network installers. And of course, this happened after they had gone through training. The training program entailed some of the ISOC programs, such as designing and deploying computer networks, and also building wireless community networks. So the example I'm giving is just one. There are many other community networks on the continent. I'll share a few other examples that might be close to most of our listeners as we move along. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what are some of the products and services that the community network offers? So, of course, there is connectivity, providing internet connectivity to the community level, mostly relying on the industrial, scientific, and medical band. That is 2.4 and 5.8 gigahertz. And just to note that in Kenya particularly, the Communications Authority has actually embraced the concept of community networks and has developed a licensing framework that manages community networks, which is available at $50. And the jurisdiction of a community network has also defined to be at sub-county level, which is basically a very small geographic or jurisdictional area. And there are certain proof that an organization needs to provide that first and foremost, it is working in the community and it has endorsement of the local leadership in the community, and that there is a community interest or participation in that particular organization that is actually designing and deploying the infrastructure that is being used in the community. So other organizations in the Kenyan ecosystem, such as the Kenya Network Information Center, have also embraced community networks, and they have taken up community network organization as the main registrars to make sure that local communities are also able to appreciate the internet value chain. As we deploy community networks, of course, electricity remains a major challenge in most of rural Kenya, as in many other parts of the world. And whereas there is electricity, its stability is another issue. And so, of course, we have embraced solar power, and the more we deploy solar solutions at the POPs, the more community members are also embracing it as an alternative source of power. The other point is we have also provided connectivity solutions for schools that are in far-flung areas and which are not within the reach of traditional internet service providers, for lack of a better word. And with it, there's been a lot of school solutions that have been developed to enable students to be able to access content in addition to internet at school level. So we've been providing low-cost computing devices, Raspberry Pis, to schools, which are used as content servers. But over and above that, we've also been providing internet connectivity that is crucial. In Kenya, as in many other African countries, we have the National Education Management Information System, which requires the details of each pupil in a primary school or in a high school be logged into a national portal. So previously, most teachers in the schools had to travel long distances to access cyber cafes in the nearest towns so that they can be able to upload information or content that is containing students' information. But currently, as we speak, due to community networks, most of the schools are able to do this within their respective schools. Of course, we have also generated quite a bit of research material that is supporting or aiding in the development of community networks. And the community networks movement is now really growing across the African continent. As we speak, at the beginning of this year, we only had 4 community networks in Kenya. As we speak, we have 11. And with the support of the Communications Authority, this might move to 100 as they explore community networks as a viable alternative to bridging the last mile. Tanzania is also having a proliferation of community networks. I know in South Africa, we have Zenzeleni, we have Pamoja in DRC.
Barak, we can't hear you. You're breaking. Hello, Barak. You are muted. Could you please retry?
Oh, sorry. If you could move to the next slide, kindly. Next slide. All right. Next slide. I would just wish to go to the. Yeah, just keep moving. There, please. Yeah. I would wish to come to this because I can summarize the rest of the information on the slides, and it will be available for the community to be able to consume. And the question that I wanted to pose through this presentation to the community is that how can community networks contribute to better use of internet resources in Africa? We are seeing a scenario in which regulatory bodies on the African continent are embracing community networks and building licensing frameworks that govern how community networks are addressed. So could this be a solution to even some of the questions we are asking ourselves in the room in building capacity for governing how we utilize our internet resources? And for instance, if we bring this conversation closer to the community using community networks, is it likely to change how we view and appropriate internet resources on the African continent? The second question that I wish to pose through the presentation that I'm making is how can community networks help in championing the growth of local content and growth of local internet traffic? Remember, beyond just providing internet infrastructure at community level, there is the whole internet value chain. We need content. Most from observation on our community networks, we realize that a majority of the people are either on YouTube or they are on Netflix. and they can watch Netflix end to end, or they can watch as many documentaries as they wish on YouTube. But the question I wish to ask is, where is local content? Trying to just go through YouTube channels, I can attest to the fact that there's very little content that I can identify with as a Kenyan citizen wearing my Kenyan hat. And I'm sure many other people who are participating on the call can identify with this. So how do we then catalyze a process of uploading local and meaningful content that is drawn from our communities? We have a lot of folklore, we have a lot of traditional stories from the African community that, if we digitize, would really create or form very interesting content on the internet. We have seen countries that, for instance, focus on using their local languages really excel when it comes to usage of various resources. For instance, in China, the people predominantly access the internet in the Chinese language. In Japan, the people predominantly access the internet in Japanese language. In Europe, most people use English or their native languages, but we are seeing less of African languages being used to project or broadcast content on the internet. And I think the only way we can be able to do or achieve this is by testing the concept of community networks, because if local communities design and deploy their own networks, most likely they will also upload their own local content. And we have seen success stories with community radios, proliferation of community radios where people are able to consume content in their local language. There are things that cannot be said in English. When you translate them from a traditional African language to English language, you lose the meaning completely, and you lose people's interest, and you lose the value completely. So even as we look at the internet conversation from a continental perspective, we also need to consider that we have to start at the bottom and then build upwards. And my final ask, which may not be relevant in this particular session, is, can Afrinic consider a special membership package for community networks as part of social responsibility? When I hear the conversation around internet resource management on the African continent, it is heavily commercialized. Yet, when we look at the growth and development of the internet globally, we see, for instance, in the US, heavy investment from government using public resources to make sure that the internet develops as a public good. And most of these countries have reached a certain maturity level, which I would humbly request that, in as much as we are looking at closing the gap in terms of global competitiveness, we also look at our learning curve and also appreciate where we are. So what can we be able to do to be able to let our communities take into their own hands the responsibility of designing and deploying networks, let our communities appreciate the value of in the or rather the value in the internet, uh, or rather electronic commerce ecosystem, so that they can be able to invest from a point of knowledge. And last but not least, my humble opinion would be, if we invest in the community, it will definitely pay back. The current models that we are using, first and foremost, we have borrowed them from other jurisdictions. And I think there is an opportunity. I'm sure this room is not short of technical experts who can be able to contextualize the issues in the African local communities and build business models that ensure that our communities are able to tap into the internet value chain. We have seen the explosion of mobile money on the African continent that has been unique. Some of them have not been tried and tested in other jurisdictions, but have worked here because we have dared to dream, or we have dared to try. So even as we think about the internet on a larger scale, or from a commercial standpoint, I beseech this gathering to consider the community, because that is where we start. and we must hold our hands together and make sure that we support initiatives that ensure that the internet conversation begins at community level and scales up to continental level. And I believe that we'll be able to address most of the challenges, including governance challenges that are facing us. Because if we are able to sort it at community level, we'll be able to sort it at global level. I submit and thank you, Mr. Moderator, for the opportunity to present.
Thank you very much, Barak. Sorry, thank you very much, Barak, for this presentation. So, as usual, if there are any questions for you, if there are any questions for this presentation, please type them in the chat, or please raise your hand if you want to speak directly to Barak. At the same time, as usual, we are running a survey, and the link has been posted on the chat. So it would be nice to get a rating from you. So please spare a minute or two to complete the survey. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have a question from Paul Hulge. Paul says, I didn't pick up where the network infrastructure you are rolling out is IPv6 native.
Okay, thank you. I think I will attempt to answer the question. Most of the community networks are deploying hub and spoke infrastructure, and because most of them started post 2016, or the movement has been kicking post 2016, most of the networks are capable of supporting IP version 6. But I must say that because most of us for upstream, we rely on existing internet service providers, they do allocate us IP version 4 addresses. But that's why I'm bringing this conversation to this gathering, so that if the community embraces and gives a shot on the community networks idea, then we can see how to also build their technical capacity or capabilities. But community networks basically support both IP version 6 and IP version 4. Of course, because most of them depend or rely on sometimes donated infrastructure or low-cost infrastructure, a good number are dependent on, are still running on the IP version 4 infrastructure, but from a core network perspective, most of them can support both IP version 6 and IP version 4. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Barak. I don't see any other question in the chat for now. And any other hand raised. So I will give an extra minute maybe for any participant to ask their questions.